What's up everybody, I am Jaspreet Singh, and it's no surprise that our world and our economy is changing. We went from talking about the Great Reset where you will own nothing and be happy to now talking about the New World Order. The billionaire investor Ray Dalio recently put out a book and a YouTube video talking about the changing world order and principles to guide through this changing world order, where he talks about how the world order is going to change and how the United States is heading for a decline and what you need to be doing with your money right now. If you want to watch his video and his thoughts on the changing world order, I'll put that link down for you in the description. But what I want to do today is go over what this changing world order is and why the United States might be heading for a decline, and then I will give you my thoughts on what Ray Dalio is talking about. If you don't know who Ray Dalio is arguably the most successful hedge fund manager in history. He started a hedge fund called Bridgewater, and Bridgewater became the most successful and the biggest hedge fund in history thanks to his research. And the reason why he has been so successful with his clients' money and his money is because he doesn't just invest his money on emotions, he invests money based off of historical trends. He and his company look back hundreds of years to see what has happened in the economy and in different financial markets, and based off of what happened in history, he applies those lessons and those principles to investments today, because while history might not exactly repeat itself, it does rhyme. There are 5 key lessons when Ray Dalio is talking about the changing world order. The first is that our paper money is fake. It's not real money. We'll talk about the history of money, and then he talks about the changing world order. What causes different world orders to change in the past and why this is going to change our new world order. Then he talks about the big cycle. This takes you through the world order cycle and how you see the rise and fall of big civilizations, especially reserve currencies like the dollar that we have now. And this brings us to where we are now. The decline of the United States was causing the decline of the United States, and then what's coming next and what we can do to extend our lifeline as the United States, as the leading world power and as a leading world currency. So let me start by talking about number 1, our money. Money by definition is supposed to be a representation or a store of value, but our paper dollars, what we call money, doesn't do that. Back in the day, our dollars used to be backed by physical gold. Now there's a limited supply of gold in the world, and it takes time, effort, and labor to mine an ounce of gold, so that value is seen through physical gold. Gold is a physical store of value because it takes time, effort, and labor to produce it. There's a limited supply of it. That's why gold has been a world currency for civilizations now. Now, our paper dollars used to be backed by gold, but then in 1971, we severed the gold standard. We took the dollar off of the gold standard, and the reason why was because the United States was spending a lot of money. The United States had a big pile of gold, but they were spending more money than we actually had in gold. So the United States kept writing checks to the rest of the world and to people in the United States saying, sure, we will pay for this, we will pay for that, but they didn't have enough gold to pay for these things. That's when the United States took the dollar off of the gold standard. That way we could print more money, our paper dollars, than the gold that we had. So before 1971, you still had paper dollars, but the paper dollars that you had were essentially gold certificates. They said you have access to $100 worth of gold, and you can always redeem your paper dollars for physical gold. But then when the United States started spending so much money before 1971, you had people around the world, countries around the world, that were worried about the United States money because they were spending more money that they earned. This was the real money that the United States had. This physical gold was their money that they were earning, but they were spending more money that they were earning. So you had a lot of people around the world saying, give us gold in exchange for our paper dollars. People wanted the gold. They don't want this piece of paper, because at the end of the day, a piece of paper is just a piece of paper versus physical gold is real money. That's when President Nixon in 1971 said, bugaboo, we are no longer going to allow the convertibility from dollars to gold, because he took the dollar off of the gold standard. Now, this wasn't the first time that we saw this happen in history. We saw the United States completely abandon the gold standard in 1971. But in 1933, we saw the same thing happen as well when President Roosevelt abandoned the gold standard for the United States. That way the government could then print more money and continue funding their operations. Because when you don't have enough money to fund your operations, you don't have enough gold, what do? Well, you severed the gold standard, then you just print more money. You create more money out of thin air, that way you can go out and fund your operations. And you have the privilege to do that when you are the world's reserve currency, because then you can just create more inflation. Because now you increase the amount of dollars out there, which reduces the value of each individual dollar. It reduces the buying power of each individual dollar. But if you are the world's reserve currency, you have the privilege to do that because you are in charge of the world order. This is what inflation is. When you have an increase in dollars without an increase in actual wealth, that means that the value of each individual dollar goes down, which is what inflation is. But now when the government and the central bank have the ability to print an unlimited amount of paper dollars as they want on command, and you have this money enter our markets without an increase in productivity, then more of this money enters the stock market, the commodity market, and into gold, which makes the price of these three assets, stocks, commodities, and gold, go up in value. It makes them more expensive because people are taking the dollars and putting them into these assets because they don't want to keep these dollars in cash, because your cash is losing value to inflation. Now, at first glance, this might not seem like a big deal. The United States is the world's superpower, and if it needs to print more money, what's the big deal? I mean, we've been doing this for decades, and everything's been going just fine. But according to Ray Dalio's research, it turns out this type of spending, overspending, has been happening for centuries with civilizations. Anytime a major civilization rises to the top and then they start spending more money than they earn, they spend more money than the wealth that they actually have, they sever this actual money standard, it leads to the decline of civilizations because now you have to start financing more, you become a debtor nation rather than a creditor nation, and now you have more money going out than coming in. This analysis of understanding what's happened in the past with civilizations time and time again has led Ray Dalio to come up with two principles right here. Principle number one is when central banks start printing a lot of money, go out and buy stocks, commodities, I'm gonna abbreviate that, and gold, because the value of these will go up when the value of the dollar goes down. And the second principle is to understand what's coming at you, you have to understand what happened behind you. So in other words, know your history, especially when it comes to money, because history rhymes, and you see the same things happen again and again and again after civilization after civilization after civilization. Now I want to mention the topic of gold for a second because I own physical gold. I have a strategy where every month I buy a little bit of physical gold. It's not a huge piece of my portfolio, and the reason why I buy gold isn't to see a massive return on my money. I'm investing in gold as another way for me to save real money because gold is real physical money. So it's another way for me to do that. But I also understand in my portfolio that when I invest in gold, I'm not looking to see a huge return because the value that gold provides isn't changing. I mean, gold just sits around and doesn't really do anything, but it's another way to save real money. I buy physical gold through a platform called Vaulted. They're a sponsor of Minority Mindset, and they allow me to buy physical gold. The gold stays in a vault, and then as my monthly investments reach a full physical bar of gold, they can either ship me out the gold and I own the gold myself, or they can keep it in a vault themselves. So if you want to learn more and see how you can invest in gold with Vaulted, I'll put the link to how you can do that down in the description below. This brings us to the second topic, which is understanding the changing world order. Right now, the world order is led by the United States and the United States dollar. Before the United States, it was the British Empire and the pound, and before the British Empire, it was the Dutch Empire with the guilder. So what Ray Dalio says is that anytime you have these three factors come together, it causes a change in the world order. Number one, countries run out of money or they don't make enough money to pay down their debts, so then they start reducing their interest rates, and then they reduce interest rates all the way down to zero, and even after they do that, they still cannot afford to keep paying off all their debts because over the last number of years, countries have racked up so much debt, and now they cannot afford to pay down their debt even when interest rates are zero. So then the central banks come in and they start printing a whole lot of money, which creates a whole lot of inflation. So countries start printing money as a solution to fix their financial problems. Second, you start to see more internal conflicts within the country itself because you start to see a bigger divide between the rich and the poor, and this also leads to more political conflicts because now the left will want to do more financial redistribution while the right will not want to do that. They'll want to keep money in the hands of the wealthy, and so this starts to create more internal conflict, which in turn makes the country poorer because it's spending more of its resources to fix their internal conflicts. And third, you start to see more external conflicts between the country that's in charge and the country that's in second place but growing very rapidly. We're seeing that happen right now because right now the United States is the world order. The United States is in charge of the world. They are the world's reserve currency. But the country that's in second place that's growing very quickly is China. And you're also starting to see more growing tensions between China and the United States. The last time we saw a world order change was in 1944, right after World War II. When the Allies won World War II, we saw the world order change, and that was when the United States dollar became the world's currency. So 1944 was when the dollar became the reserve currency of the world after the United States and the Allies won World War II, and that was the shift in the previous world order from the British pound to the United States dollar. What Ray Dalio says is anytime you have these three factors come together, that is the catalyst for now a change in the world order because it allows another country to come in and take over the top country's spot, and that's what we're starting to see happen right now. The United States is declining while China, who is in the second spot, is growing very rapidly. And then Ray Dalio lists the 8 different factors that if you average these together will show you the strength of a world power. So let me wipe this off and show you what the 8 different measures are. They are: number 1, the education and the education system. Number 2, the strength and technology of that country and the world power. 3, the competitiveness in global markets. How strong is this country in its ability to compete in innovation and create new products and create new companies? Number 4, its economic output. How fast is the economy growing? Is the economy growing? How big is the economy? Number 5, what's its share in the world trade? Is this country producing products for the rest of the world that people want? Or is this country not really producing anything? Number 6, the strength of its military presence. Number 7, the strength in its financial markets in order to produce more products and innovation in its country. And number 8, the strength in its currency to be a world's reserve currency. So when you see those 3 factors come together, where you have the central banks printing more money to fund their operations and to fund the government, and then you have more internal conflicts because of a widening wealth gap, and then you start to see more external conflicts between number 1 and number 2, then you want to pay attention to these 8 factors. Because when you start to see the number 2 country start to grow in these 8 factors, and the number 1 country starts to shrink in these 8 factors, that's what gives rise and the opportunity for number 2 to take over number 1. And this brings us to number 3, understanding what Ray Dalio calls the big cycle, which is the rise and fall of empires. So what he says is that every empire follows this type of trajectory. First, you have something called the rise, then you have the top phase, and then you have the decline phase, which is on the way down. And every empire, every civilization, and every reserve currency follows through this. And this is what he talks about when we talk about the changing world order, because every world order is going to go through the same system. What he says is that typically a new world order is going to start after a conflict. It's going to typically start after a war or something like that, because no country or power that's in charge is going to want to lose their power and their place in the world without a fight. So you typically see some sort of conflict. We saw the last one happen after World War II, 1944. And then you have this new era of peace and prosperity, because now you have a new world order, and other countries and other civilizations do not want to challenge this new country. So you have this era of peace and prosperity, and this new world order starts to grow and rise. And then as people start to see that happen, you see this new world reserve currency, and other countries and civilizations around the world now start to bring their money here because they want to own a piece of this growing country. They want to own a piece of this new world order. They want to own a piece of this new reserve currency. So you start to see more and more money come in here, which starts to create a financial bubble. Because now this country is growing very quickly, you see more dollars come in, and this now brings even more money into this civilization and into this world order, which leads to an era of prosperity and a wealth gap. You start to see an uneven divide between the rich and the poor, because some people are making more money than others. And this is where you start to see this top phase. So now you're the world's reserve currency, and you want to keep growing at the pace that you've been. So now the central banks start printing even more money, making the bubble even bigger, and then eventually the bubble's going to pop. And now the bubble pops, and now the government and the central banks want to get the economy going again as fast as possible. So now you start to see even more money printing. This is when you start to see the decline. Now you start to see even more aggressive money printing, which leads to an even bigger divide between the wealthy and the poor. And this leads to more internal internal conflicts. And now you internally have people that are disagreeing with one another. You have the left that want to see more redistribution, and you have the right that don't want to have this redistribution. And you start to see this sense of wealth and luxury in society because people are doing less productive work. People are spending more money. People are living high. People are buying nice things, and they're not really producing anything in the country. People are getting this sort of generational wealth from their parents and their grandparents, and they don't have to earn and produce anything. While other countries in the world are starting to get smarter. They have this internal sense of hard work, this internal sense of innovation, this internal sense to create, because they weren't gifted this wealth and this luxury like people in the world power have, because people in the world power everywhere across the board have more wealth than people around the world. And so people are living this luxury, and you start to see more and more conflict internally because people want more things given to them. And then this also starts to create more external conflict, the third thing that I was talking about, because now countries around the world that are growing are starting to see an opportunity, and now you start to see more conflict because this country, the top country, is starting to slow down, they're starting to lose, while the second country has this value of hard work. They have this value of being creative. They have this value of community, together, oneness, and they're growing while this country is slowing down. And then this ultimately leads to the decline because now you have this external power, this external force that has a strong military that's been growing. And now when the conflict happens, the second country can then take over the first, and that leads to a new world order. So empires rise, people become rich, and then they start to become complacent. They lose their sense of working hard, and then people start to want more luxury. They want to inherit their wealth, and they want to spend their money in luxury, which then creates opportunities for other countries that are striving to grow to come and overpass the country that's in charge. We saw it happen with the Victorian era and the British Empire. We saw it happen with the Golden Era and the Dutch Empire. And now Ray Dalio says we're going to see it happen in the American US Empire too. The sign that you want to pay attention to that shows you're starting to enter this decline, according to Ray Dalio, is when rich countries start borrowing money from poor countries in order for the rich country to keep up with their certain living standards and their luxury. We saw the British Empire do that. We saw the Dutch Empire do that. And we saw the United States do this in the 1980s as well, because in the 1980s, the United States had a per capita income 40 times larger than China. But that's when the United States also started to borrow money from China. That way the United States could continue funding their operations. So the Chinese started lending money to the United States, even though the United States was making 40 times more money per person in the United States than the Chinese were. Once the empire and country in charge starts to run out of lenders, people willing to lend money to the empire in charge, that's when people start to dump that reserve currency, and that's what causes civilization to fall. And this brings us to number 4, understanding the decline. When you have an empire or a country that becomes very large, and then you start to see the economy slow down, and then also you have lenders not willing to lend more money to the country, that's what creates the financial bubble bursting. Now, at this point, you have two options. Either the country and civilization can default and essentially refresh, or the country and civilization can print a lot of money to help get the economy running again. And every single time, the country picks the latter. The empire will then choose to print more money rather than default to help the economy continue to grow. But that's how you know now you are in the decline. Lenders are not willing to lend more money to that country, but instead, now you go out and use the central bank to just keep printing your own money, which dilutes the value of your currency, and it also then creates a bigger divide between the rich and the poor, which makes your country now weaker internally, which now also makes your country weaker when it comes to external threats. For the Dutch Empire, they went into deep debt trying to finance the Fourth Anglo-Dutch War, and that ultimately led the currency to collapse relative to the value of gold, and then the civilization fell, and then you had the New World Order. For the British Empire, it was the cost of financing 2 different world wars, and then you had its own currency, the pound, lose value relative to gold, which then brought about a New World Order, which was the United States and the United States dollar. But another common thing that happens during this decline phase is you have the internal divide between the left and the right, the haves and the have-not, the poor and the rich. And now you have more and more people calling on some sort of wealth redistribution. So now you start to raise taxes on the rich. And this is where the rich then start to leave, because they say, we don't want to pay these taxes. So then the rich take their money, they take their assets, they take their commodities, and then they leave. Now you have a country, a civilization, and an empire. We've seen this happen from civilization to civilization to civilization that's relying on less output. And they're using this less output to now fund the operations of the country, which means the country is now less productive and they have less assets and less means to be able to survive and grow, which ultimately makes this country even weaker now because they just lost some of their most valuable resources. And now as the country becomes weaker, it makes it easier to challenge from an external country or empire who wants to take over the world order. The last straw of the decline right here is when people start to ditch the currency. They no longer like this currency as the world's reserve currency. People start selling this currency to buy something else, whether it's physical gold or another currency. And we've seen this happen again and again and again. In the 1700s, there were something like 750 different currencies out there. Now, today, there's less than 20% of them because so many of them have just been completely devalued away. This brings us to number 5, understanding where we are right now and where we are going. So according to Ray Dalio, the United States is in this decline phase right now. The United States already has massive amounts of debt. It is borrowing more money than it earns, and we are in this luxury wealth phase right now where people are producing less, they're working less, we're losing the sense of working hard while other countries are growing. Right now we're able to fund all of our operations with more and more borrowing, and we're doing that by printing more and more money because less and less countries are willing to lend more money to the United States, so the Fed and the central banks just keep printing more money, but the huge sell-off of the dollar hasn't started yet. And we also haven't seen the rise of the external conflicts yet, which would lead to a new world order, according to Ray Dalio. Now, when it comes to understanding how much time do we have left, he says that it's not always so easy to answer because it's kind of like saying, how much time does a person have left on this earth? And it's not always so easy to answer because it's not just looking at the average life expectancy. You have to look at somebody's health. You have to look at their diet. You have to look at their genetics. You have to look at whether they smoke or not. You have to look at how often they exercise. And it's the exact same thing with civilizations and empires. There are things that we can do right now to extend our lifespan, but they're going to be painful. That would require us to start fighting inflation. That would start requiring us to produce more innovation. That would start requiring us to invest in education. That would start requiring us to do more things, which would be painful today, but they will allow us to continue to stay the world power and the world reserve currency. And that also means that you need a government and people that are willing to go through that short-term pain to extend the lifespan of the empire and the world order. That's why Ray Dalio says that a nation's greatest war is with itself to decide whether it's going to sustain itself as the world order or not. It's not an easy thing to do. He says ultimately we need to focus on 2 things right now. Earn more money than what we spend, from people to the civilization to the government. We need to earn more than what we spend, which means we need to cut our spending and increase our income. And second, treat people well. Treat people like we want to be treated. And that seems like a simple solution, but the reality is when you treat people well, people are able to dialogue with one another, people are able to talk to one another, you start to have less internal conflict. When you have less internal conflict and you have more dialogue and you have people working with one another and you can work together as a civilization, as a one community, now we can work towards the same goal. When you have that, you have less resources from the government being used to prevent a civil war on the inside borders, and now you can use your resources to protect yourself against external conflict and against external issues. So those are the 2 things that he says that we need to work on, and he talked about the 8 different factors that measure a civilization's success. Well, he says if you have those 2 things, they will trickle down to all 8. Because if you have a good education system, that will lead to more technology, which will lead to more income. And if you know how to use your money and you treat people well, then all these things will then funnel down into creating a stronger empire, which will then increase the lifespan of your empire. But right now, the United States has been on top for a long time, and we need to understand where we are in this cycle, and we need to understand how history works. That way we can stay the world's superpower, but you have to understand what's going on. That way you can make the smartest decisions with your money. And when it comes to what do you do with your money, remember he says when central banks are printing a lot of money, do 3 things. This is what Ray Dalio says. He says you should be buying stocks, you should be buying commodities, and you should be buying some gold. If you enjoyed this video, here's a video on things you should do if you have $1,000 right now, and why I added, if you want to start generating passive income, you can read my free guide on how to do that. All you got to do is click that button down below. Thank you for watching, and as always, keep hustling. There are certain secrets that your bank does not want you to know because these are things that will make you money, but they don't make your bank any money. And